Hello, my dear children. Today we will be studying the first chapter of Class 12 textbook Flamingo, and the title of the first chapter happens to be The Last Lesson, written by Alphonse Daudet. Alphonse Daudet was a 19th century French novelist, a dramatist, and a short story writer. He wasn't very well educated. He wrote his first novel at the age of 14, and many of his works drew inspiration from instances of his own life. It was the Franco-Prussian War in 1870-71 that had a very drastic effect on their life. So this whole chapter revolves around the effect of war on the lives of not only children but teachers and other villagers as well. These are a few of his works as on the next slide as well. These are a few of his books. You can look at them and maybe sometime think of reading them. The background of the story has a lot to do with the chapter. Monsieur Hamel's last chapter. Monsieur Hamel is the teacher in this chapter, and he will be delivering his last French language class to the students of the school in Alsace. The story is set in the days of Franco-Prussian War, and the French district of Alsace and Lorraine were captured by Germans. Now, because they were captured by Germans, the French master, Monsieur Hamel, was asked not to teach French any longer because now German would be taught to the school in Alsace. In this, you can see that the district of Alsace and Lorraine has been conquered by the German armies. The green arrows show the intrusion of the German armies, and therefore the French districts have been conquered. As such, German would only be forcibly taught in these districts, and French would no longer be taught. The order that was passed as a result of the Franco-Prussian War was that the French would no longer be taught in the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine, and only German would be allowed to be taught in their schools. I am repeating this again and again because it is actually this particular order which is going to bring about a change in the way the school started on that particular day of the last lesson, in the way Franz, the main hero, the protagonist, behaved, in the way the teacher taught that day, in the way the old villagers had decided to come and attend the last lesson of French language. This is another map where you can see how the Germans have conquered most of France and what effect it has over the territory. As I said earlier, the order would affect France, Monsieur Hamel, as well as the old villagers. There are two major themes of this chapter, linguistic chauvinism and patriotism. You will find that all the episodes in this chapter cater to these two themes, which will be discussed in detail in the following slides. Linguistic chauvinism is a devotion for or against something, just based on what you feel, not necessarily what you may know. So linguistic chauvinism is the idea that one's language is superior to that of others. And this happens generally when the language is that of the ruling class. In this chapter, the Germans think very highly of their language. They want German language to be taught in the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine, which they have occupied. They don't want people to learn French language. They are very, very particular of the fact that French language must be totally eliminated from the districts of Alsace and Lorraine. So the Germans are hell-bent on eradicating French language from the face of earth and replacing it with German language. This is actually linguistic chauvinism in the case of the last lesson. And this is what the Berlin Order was about, to ban the learning of French language in the schools of these two districts and superimpose the learning of German language. Thus, this becomes the last French lesson that Monsieur Hamel would be delivering. The other theme that this chapter revolves around is patriotism. And if we look at the chapter and we go back to its contents after reading it, we will realize that there are at times when the inhabitants and the citizens of a particular country do not realize the importance of the freedom they enjoy till that freedom is severed from them. And therefore, this chapter deals with how the old villagers, Monsieur Hamel, Franz, and the other children, they are in awe of the last lesson of French language, because they realize that this would be the last time they would ever be able to learn French. And they are full of regret. Not only are the villagers full of regret, or not only are the students full of regret, even Monsieur Hamel is full of regret that he did not teach them maybe that efficiently as he should have. And Alsace, he says, has also been in the habit of procrastination. That means postponing certain decisions which has cost her freedom. So patriotism also revolves around the characters in this chapter, and as we go through the chapter, we'll further learn about it. So what we are doing is we're going to take up each and every page. I would expect you to read the passage and then you will take care of these particular questions in the chapter. When we look at this particular question, I would like you to keep in mind how you need to answer them. Why did Franz dread a scolding? Because he was actually very late that morning and was in a great dread of a scolding, because number one, he was late and he had not prepared the participles. Number two, what distracted Franz on the way to school? There were a number of things that distracted him. And when we look at those number of things, I would like you to keep in mind these specific things. He thought of spending the day out of doors. He thought of running away because he thought the day outside was much more better. It was so warm and bright. The birds were chirping at the edge of the woods, and there were Prussian soldiers drilling. So in question number 2, you may them answer the question with these specific ideas, these specific points. Why was there a crowd in front of the bulletin board? There was a crowd in front of the bulletin board because this was where all news, all the bad news related to the war used to be there. The lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer. And this was where he felt as if he should see what was written there, but somehow he decided to go ahead. On the previous page over here, we can see that our teacher had warned. He says, our teacher had warned. I'll take the highlighter, please. Our teacher had warned when he entered the school, the class, he realized that his teacher had worn the beautiful green. He knew how to write. So he realized that that was what they had put up on the town hall. This is what he had realized. Franz regretted that when he had the time, he did not study and learn the language. He thought his grammar books were heavy to carry. He did not learn the history of saints. And now he did not even pay, at that time, he did not even pay attention to Monsieur Hamel. Because, and why? Why did he regret? Because now he realized that he is going to go away and he would never ever see him again. This made him forget about his ruler and how cranky he was. Why were the old villagers sitting there? The old villagers were sitting there because they too wanted to show their respect to the country and also gratitude for their master for his 40 years of faithful service. So the old men of the village were sitting there because of this reason. They too were sorry and that they had not gone to school more, and they wanted to thank their master for his 40 years of faithful service and wanted to show their respect for the country. Why did Franz feel bad when his name was called? Because he would have given anything to be able to say the dreadful rule of the participle all through. On this page, we will find that Monsieur Hamel is not going to be angry with everybody. He says that we all have a great deal to reproach ourselves with. Reproach means blame ourselves for not having studied what? Not having studied their own language when they had the time. So he said that he will not scold Franz that day. And he said we have a lot to reproach ourselves because everybody was in the habit of procrastination. It means that we were all responsible for delaying, putting ahead, and postponing the language. And he says it is also troubled with Alsace. She also puts off. She here, therefore, Alsace has been personified. She puts off learning till tomorrow. And he says that we have nothing to scold you for because even parents were not anxious enough to make you learn. They preferred that you went for work to have more money. And even myself, have I not sent you? That means even Monsieur Hamel, when he was supposed to teach, he sent them, these children, to water plants and instead of learning their lessons. And even when Monsieur Hamel, wanted to go fishing, he just gave a holiday to them. So he says that not only does Monsieur Hamel have something to regret or reproach themselves? It is also parents also who are to blame. And what does the third question is, what does Monsieur Hamel have to say about French language? He says that French language is the most beautiful language in the whole world. It is the most logical language. That is going to be on the next page. This chapter talks about basically what all emotions are involved for a teacher who has to teach his lesson for the last time. A teacher who has been teaching them for the last 40 years has to suddenly stop teaching French language. It also involves the emotions of those who had to attend it, the emotions of France, the emotions of the old villagers sitting at the back benches. So now when we look at what he says about French language, he said that it was the most beautiful language. And then he opened the grammar and read after the grammar. They had a lesson in writing, and after that they had a lesson in history. But what he said about the language, French language, he said it was the most beautiful language in the world, the most clearest and the most logical. And we need to guard it because children, when we know our language, that is something that can never be unlearned. That is something that never can be taken away from us. So if we hold on fast to our language, even if we are prisoners of another country, that language will prove to be the key to that prison. So this is what he has to say. He has great pride in French language. Now, In this last lesson, actually the last class which Monsieur Hamel had taken, we can say it was the most effective one. Why can we say that? Because he poured his soul into his teaching that day, and the students also felt it. They too were so attentive that they easily understood all the lessons. They savored the class because it was their last French lesson. And Monsieur Hamel was over passionate about how he was going to teach that day. In fact, he had bought new copies for the sad but special occasion, and he had written on them with beautiful handwriting, France Alsace. Everybody worked diligently, and Monsieur Hamel tried to absorb each and every moment of that last class. So you can see that none of the children were distracted. Even when beetles flew in, nobody paid attention to them, not even the littlest ones. And they kept on as if tracing their fish hooks. This is just indicative that they were very, very concentrated. The last line on this page, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? That's a major, major portion of this chapter. Questioning to what extent will Germany go to make them learn their language and forget French? Will they even go to the extent of making pigeons also coo in German and not in French? Monsieur Hamel on the last day of school was very, very emotional about everything. He was really heartbroken to leave it all. Besides, his own predicament reminded him that his country would soon lose its independence. All of this made him feel sad towards the end of his last lesson. And you can see he tried to absorb everything that he could in that one class. He wanted to take everything along with him. Children, this is a residential school kind of a setup because we can hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks. So there's a possibility he used to stay in the room above this class. And the last line says that they had to leave the country the next day. And that was something he could not even fathom about. So, children, it's all related to the fact of his patriotic feeling, and he also wanted all others to realize how significant it is to know your own language and how important it is to allow your mother tongue to be free and not under any other government. This chapter is infused with patriotism and love for one's own mother tongue. And the old villagers who were sitting at the back on the back benches, they all had come to pay a tribute to Monsieur Hamel and wanted to convey their gratitude. They all wanted to cry and laugh at the same time because on the last day, the way the old Hauser was reading the primer, that is the elementary book, was really funny. But at the same time, they wanted to cry because their native language was being snatched away from them. And if you realize this, just put yourself in their condition for a minute and think that how would it feel if you were not allowed to speak your own language living in your own country. Fran says, ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. They all must have been involved, but suddenly the church clock struck 12 and then the Angelus. Angelus actually is a bell rung as to call to recite for a particular prayer. And when the bell rang, the clock struck 12, even the Prussians, the trumpets of the Prussians, returning from the drill sounded under their windows. And Monsieur Hamel was overwhelmed at that time. He could hardly speak a few words, and with a very heavy heart he said, and something choked him. He could not go on with the lesson. He turned to the blackboard and wrote, Vive la France! Long live France! All that he could do was lean his head against the wall, make a gesture to the students, school is dismissed and you may go. So it's a very overwhelming situation for Monsieur Hamel, and we as children may not be able to realize this at this point of time because we are very fortunate to live in a free country, but understand what would they might be feeling, that this is the last lesson that ever would be delivered by their favorite French teacher who's been teaching them for the last, not them, but the school for the last 40 years. So it's a lesson about linguistic chauvinism. It's a lesson about how you need to earn respect and how you need to actually be very, very proud of your own country. So when you are severed from something, only then you realize its importance. In fact, we all could relate to it at this time. Why? Because I'm sure all of us are yearning to get back to school. It was that very school where we didn't like going, and somehow we had been also guilty of procrastinating a number of things, learning, pushing it aside, thinking there's a lot of time to interact with each other. But here we are at this point of time. What are we doing? We are interacting with each other through a virtual medium, which somehow I feel does not really quench the thirst of our dear children and even of our students. The next few slides are going to be a set of MCQs around, I think so, 15 MCQs, and we can do them together as we go ahead. The following set of 5 short answer type questions have to be done in your registers. I'll be discussing them one at a time. The first question is, what tempted Franz to stay away from school? So when we talk about this, we need to go back to the first page in which there is an introduction about what all did Franz find much more tempting than to attend school. For him, the bright day, the chirping of the birds, and the drill performed by the Prussian soldiers, that was something that tempted him to stay away from school. Instead of attending the class, he wanted to spend some time outside and enjoy the beauty of the day. He didn't like going to school because Monsieur Hamel was teaching French and he didn't like learning that language. Moreover, he was not prepared with his chapter on participle. I hope this would be of some help to you students. The question number that is coming up next is, why does Monsieur Hamel reproach himself for his students' negligence of French language? In this short story, the French teacher, Monsieur Hamel, reproaches himself for his students' unsatisfactory progress in studies. He blames himself for sending his students to water his plants and taking holidays when he wanted to go fishing. So somewhere he was guilty of not giving them their due attention when it was at most required. The third question coming up is, why did Monsieur Hamel tell them about French language? I'm sorry, not why, but what did Monsieur Hamel tell them about French language? Remember, children, this is a chapter on patriotism, and love for one's own language is a part of that patriotism. So Monsieur Hamel told them that French was the most beautiful language in the world. It was the clearest and the most logical language. He asked them to guard it among them and never forget it. When people were enslaved, as long as they held fast to their language, they had the key to their prison. I hope you're able to understand this, children. The fourth question that is coming up is, how, according to Monsieur Hamel, one's language holds a key to a prison? Whom does he consider as enslaved in the story? In this chapter, the last lesson, Monsieur Hamel has told the students about the importance of a language in the lives of the people. He implicitly stated that a language always keeps the people of a country, of a state united. And he encouraged them to fight unitedly to win their freedom from slavery. There are examples in history where a conquered set of people who had held fast to their language could win back their freedom from their ruler. Any guesses for that? Well, the biggest example is that of the British on India, who left English with us, but somehow we Indians were able to win our freedom back. Children, everything is related to linguistic chauvinism. Linguistic chauvinism has something to do with thinking that my language is better than yours. And when one country tries to overpower another country, he wants the subjugated country to actually lose his sense of independence, his culture, his language. So war has far effects in the lives of these people. I hope you understand that. Coming to the fifth question, what does Monsieur Hamel write on the board before dismissing the class? What is its significance? We all know what he wrote. He wrote Vive la France. I might be not pronouncing it correctly, but it means long live France. And the whole idea behind it was that at that time he's infused with patriotism. He's overwhelmed with the fact that he has to leave. So he wants to leave a mark on these children and allow them to realize the importance of their language. And they wanted them to realize if they stand united and they stand in control of, in command of their language, they will be able to overcome any kind of difficulty and maybe down the line win their freedom back. So children, all these 5 questions have to be done in the register. So please do them. These are short answer questions, and we'll meet when the school reopens. These are 2 questions, long answer questions that have to be answered, and I'll be discussing them one by one. The first question is, our language is a part of our culture and we are proud of it. Describe how regretful Monsieur Hamel and the village elders were for having neglected their native language, French. So, Monsieur Hamel, again, this is related to patriotism and one's concern for one's own language. So, Monsieur Hamel and the villagers were exceedingly regretful for having neglected the learning of the French language. Monsieur Hamel, he blamed the inhabitants of Alsace and Lorraine for their lackadaisical attitude to learn French. And He even blamed himself for not teaching the French language seriously because he too had given holidays to students when he wanted to enjoy leisure activities as fishing and gardening. Both Monsieur Hamel and the villagers were proud of their mother tongue. According to their teacher, the French language was the most beautiful, clearest, and most logical language in the world. And he wanted all of his students to guard it, all the countrymen to guard the language. The villagers also loved their mother tongue, and this was the reason almost all of them had come to attend the last lesson of their beloved teacher. They are very sad for not having availed this opportunity when they had the time. The next question talks about what is linguistic chauvinism, and do you think Monsieur Hamel's profound love for French language amounts to linguistic chauvinism? Explain, giving instances from the story. This is a major question when we talk about linguistic chauvinism. I've been referring to it throughout the chapter, but I'll deal with it in a much more organized manner with this question. Well, linguistic chauvinism means the strong and unreasonable belief that your country's language is the best and the most important in the whole world. This story is all about linguistic chauvinism. It's about the acquisition of power over the Alsatians made by the Prussians so domineering that they imposed even their language on them. And if you really ask in a very short way, we can say linguistic chauvinism actually is having an absurdly extravagant pride in one's own language. Monsieur Hamel was deeply in love with the French language, but his love does not amount to linguistic chauvinism because his love is just love for his own language, and he is not claiming that his language is superior to anybody else's language. He reveals the importance of learning one's own language, whereas the people of Alsace and Lorraine, they were victims of learning German. They were being forced to learn German by Germany, by the Prussians. So that amounts to linguistic chauvinism, whereas Monsieur Hamel's love for French language does not amount to linguistic chauvinism. These are two long answer questions, students, but before you do them, I want you to remember, as I've been teaching in class 11 also, every long answer question must have 3 paragraphs. And when you're talking about 3 paragraphs, it means that the first has to have an introduction about the chapter and the theme that is asked in the question. The second paragraph has to have all the text that is relevant from the chapter. And the third paragraph will be a conclusion. This is something we've been learning from 11th standard onwards, and I hope you will be able to perform better answers this time, keeping in mind it's a board exam this year. Thank you, children.